Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. Now, this is nothing new that I've been saying. From an economic standpoint, it quickly became apparent to me that LFP batteries were the future, and I've been saying this for some time now, and I believe it is literally the most important underlying part of the entire EV and energy business. In economics, we often talk about scarcity. Why? Because if you asked me one other word to describe economics, I would say scarcity. The entire reason economics exist is because of scarcity. We live on a scarce planet, so we must economize with an economy. If we lived in the Garden of Eden, there'd be no economy, as there is abundance. In capitalism, the market dictates prices to control scarcity, hence supply and demand. Soviet Russia made up their own prices, hence the breadlines. It's no secret how much we hear nickel is scarce. There simply is not enough nickel on the planet to feasibly transition to EVs. Yet most EV batteries are still nickel-based. They use cathodes with nickel, cobalt, and manganese or aluminium. Even the 2170 and 18650 batteries Tesla currently use. Obviously, cobalt too is scarce, along with other economic issues, but Tesla, being the clever company it is, managed to make their 4680 batteries cobalt-free, but they still contain nickel. I've been saying that LFP should be able to reach a range of 300 miles with today's technology, and that 300 miles really is enough for the vast majority of drivers. And this is 300 miles LFP, which means you can charge to 100% and down to 0%. You can use the full battery without so much degradation. This is the equivalent of around a 360-mile battery using nickel. The downside being that the car will be slightly heavier due to the extra density of iron. Also, cold weather can affect the range, but Tesla solved this by heating up the batteries to 60 degrees Celsius. But the other plus side is that LFP batteries are a lot safer than nickel and less likely to combust. Oh, and obviously iron is much cheaper due to it being so much more abundant. Now, Americans in particular suffer from range anxiety and think they need a long-range car. This is due just to how sparse the country is and how far they often drive. But it's also due to a charging network that is far from mature. This will soon change, and it won't be long until there are chargers everywhere, and before long, range anxiety will be a thing of the past. But still, 300 miles is a really long distance anyway, and should be sufficient to find a charger, even in most US cities these days already, due to Tesla's already impressive charging network. Seriously, Tesla have done such a good job already with their chargers, and we are at such an early stage still. And 300 miles, I mean, how often do you ever drive further than that? Last time I said that in a video, I had people comment saying things like, well, actually, a couple of months ago I drove that far, as if they were trying to debunk me. But if that is so, and maybe you do drive further than that every couple of months, then do the math. It would mean 6 times a year you may need to stop at a charging station for 10 minutes to recharge. That's not the end of the world, and still significantly less time than filling up gas over a year. It's like people are trying to compare Tesla to absolute perfection, but it just needs to be better than gasoline. FYI, we don't have gas pumps in our houses either, but we can charge at home. And besides, 300 miles in one go without a break, well, it's unlikely for most of us. We're talking about 4 to 5 hours of driving, or more. You'll likely need to stop. Therefore, in my opinion, anyone who says they need more than 300 miles when we have sufficient charging stations doesn't make sense to me, at least not when compared to gasoline. On top of that, as LFP is so durable and doesn't degrade as much, you can charge the batteries faster too. Perhaps in time it may only be 5 minutes, which isn't too far off the time and hassle it takes to fill up with gas. Except you can't watch Tesla Economist on YouTube on a big screen when you fill up your gas tank. Anyway, as I believe LFP is such a fundamental important part of Tesla's success, I try and follow their progress as much as possible, such as the Model Y standard range using LFP, and Fremont Model 3 moving over to LFP for the standard range. Now Elon is also saying that he thinks 300 miles of range is considered long range, and beyond that is very long range. In other words, 300 miles is sufficient range for an EV, and is likely achievable with LFP. But he also says, there are vast amounts of iron and lithium on Earth, but much less nickel. For global industry to scale battery production to around 10 terawatt-hours a year, it needs to be mostly iron. High energy density nickel only needed for very long range and aircraft. As for very long range, I guess most of us are thinking of the semi-truck, but I actually think that could also work with iron too. Perhaps it could have as much as a megawatt-hour battery even. And even if it only got 250 miles of range, well, does that actually matter? Remember, these trucks are going to drive themselves, and there'll be chargers everywhere, and iron can be charged at a faster rate. Put it this way, if the semi-truck has to stop for 30 minutes every 200 miles to recharge, then so what? It may drive for 3 hours and charge for 30 minutes, but it can do that for 24 hours. Over 24 hours, that will be the equivalent of being on the road for 20 hours and charging for 4 hours. Currently, a truck driver needs much more rest than that. Also, if there's no driver's cabin necessary, then there is more space to include more batteries if necessary. We also don't need the weight of the driver either, which is possibly even another 200 pounds of weight saving. Those were highly conservative numbers. I think we could probably get a longer range with half the battery size, but I just wanted to show you how easily it could be feasible. There is no point wasting valuable nickel on road transport when we have a better alternative. Also, bear in mind, if these vehicles are all operating in boring tunnels, then that significantly increases range too, due to not having to continually stop and start. Remember, we're still at the very start of the S-curve, not just in actual EV sales, but actual EVs relative to ICE on the road today. That percentage is almost negligible. Think of the economies of scale still to come. Anyway, if nickel is feasible for more valuable applications like aircraft, then the price of nickel could rise. But please do not invest in nickel just because I said that. Commodities trading is even crazier than the stock market. 95% of people lose with commodities. Raising prices will control supply, so it can be used in more valuable resources such as aircrafts. Obviously, an aircraft costs significantly more than a car, and the cost of the nickel becomes relatively less. Also, one thing to bear in mind with what Elon has said here, and has not said, in these tweets, the whole time he's been saying iron, and not LFP. In fact, even in the Q2 earnings call, when he talks about the other form factors of batteries they'll move to, Elon says iron-based. I did infer this immediately to mean LFP, as he does also say, probably there is a long-term shift more in the direction of iron-based lithium-ion cells. But it's possible Tesla's in-house iron batteries that we hope to see next year, that they may not be lithium-ion, but sodium-ion, or what I call NFP. As sodium-based batteries are not used in EVs yet, it is hard to get that much more information on how they work. But I've already heard they potentially have a better energy density than LFP, and they do not lose charge in lower temperatures. And, of course, there is a lot more salt on the planet than there is lithium, and will potentially be cheaper again. But LFP is about 10 years ahead, and scale brings a lot of advantages, so it may be a while until we see sodium ion on a mass scale. But remember, this industry is so young, there are a host of other various technologies we're about to see when it comes to batteries, especially now that it looks like it will quickly become a multi-trillion-dollar industry. With that comes a significant amount of capital that will be invested into research and development. I know everyone is excited about seeing the Model 2 launch sometime, but for me, as a shareholder, Tesla's iron-based battery is a much bigger deal. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.